The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to this edition of Faith Matters here on the Talk Station with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. I'm Ben Ball, and let's get started with our first article today as we want to take a look at perhaps a couple of court victories that Christians may consider them victories. And this first article is from the Daily Signal. It says what conservatives did to pull off religious liberty win in California. California conservatives won a surprise victory this week, changing a state assembly bill that would have curtailed the freedom of private religious colleges. The quote is from William Jessup University President John Jackson, says, "We literally were able to see tens of thousands of people mobilized to make calls and to write their legislators and to participate in the political process." The story was about it's being called a bellwether for institutional liberty fights to come. Facing a maelstrom of grassroots controversy, State Senator Ricardo Lara, a Democrat, said Wednesday that he would remove portions of his bill, SB 1146, that would have harmed the right of religious colleges to operate according to their principles. Under the previous wording, the bill would have ultimately blocked low-income students from receiving Cal grants if they attended colleges with policies such as bathroom use based on biological sex that violated the state's LGBT policies. It would also have enabled students who feel discriminated against in light of these policies to bring a lawsuit against the college. Well, then you saw a number of conservative Christians again mount a charge to let this legislator know that he doesn't need to have that segment in the bill, and he withdrew it. Robert, let me start with you here just a bit, because this is a fight that not only takes place in California, but takes place now all over the country.
Correct.
And it is but this is an example of some effective communication.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the church has to make a decision how to approach this thing when we find our liberties being infringed upon. And as Christians, the Constitution of the United States is an incredible document, and it's very valuable for all American citizens. But this goes beyond that. This goes back to these liberties that the Constitution kind of codifies this. The founding documents codify it, that the rights that we have as individuals, these personal liberties, these rights, come not from government, they come from God. Okay, so that's the premise of this entire thing. And now we're seeing that state governments, in this case, are pushing back on that based on some things that have come down from the federal side and saying, no, we can, your liberties as a Christian end at the door of your church. As long as you're inside your church, you can do whatever you want to do. And if you have a school affiliated with you that is for religious education, you have to conform to what the state says is the way you have to be. You have to conform to all these standards.
So how is this more effective than other battles against legislation like this?
Well, this is going to affect 42 different institutions, higher education institutions in the state of California, directly, immediately. I mean, the bill never got to the floor to be voted on. It was stopped because there was such a reaction to it. And I mean, there were, in one of the paragraphs, it talks about how there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters that were sent, saying, wait a minute, what are you doing? This is crazy.
But Doc, I think one of the differences here between this, perhaps, and other battles has been is summarized in this paragraph in this article. The Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty publicized the fact that 3 out of 4 students affected by the loss of Cal grants would be low-income minority students, circulating a petition that quickly garnered 100,000 signatures. So they treated this as there's a different subject. There's a different consequence to these actions than you may be thinking.
Yes, this is less a victory for the religious institutions than it is a support of poorer Americans. They just turned the conversation. That's what Beckett did. They turned the conversation from a religious battle into one. It's like taking your enemy's side on something,
Right.
Yeah, but you don't understand. You love poor people and you want to support them, but this bill's going to hurt them. Well, I'm not saying that's a bad strategy. In fact, it was a very good strategy, and as we can clearly see it, it actually worked. Yeah.
Well, Robert, this has been cited here as a blueprint for perhaps how some other things could go. You actually sent out a story of how some education that was called abstinence education now has some different wording and has had a different effect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way you phrase, the way you word, the way you present the debate is really what we're talking about. The ideas have consequences. So if you can show in the language that you use, or in this case, the argument that you present, I mean, because what they were saying was that if you don't abide by these terms, we're cutting off all the grants,
All the funding, yeah.
and it was going to primarily affect the poorest of the poor. And, so the minorities were the ones that were going to suffer. So, yeah, that wasn't the only argument, but that was a compelling argument. There were other arguments that were, the more religious-based arguments, the liberty-based argument was in there as well. But that was one that was effective to the political class.
And the argument also has been that the bill also had other elements of it that would have been harmful too. So,
well, there are some other elements that are harmful. That's exactly right. That are still there. Yeah.
Well, they're going to, liberals don't come in and try to take a bite like a shark, and if it doesn't work, walk away. They keep coming back.
Right.
And there are several other pieces to this type of legislation. I think one of the most obviously corrupt is the idea that they want Christian universities, those who hold to being Christian universities, to have to report the full deals of every expulsion of every student. The idea is the LGBT and the liberal community is committed to the belief that Christian schools discriminate against their constituency routinely
by their very nature.
Yeah, and so they want a protocol put in place whereby if I dismiss a student from the university who happens to be LGBT, there has to be a full, public, documented explanation as to what happened, why it happened, with proof. Otherwise, you're going to get sued.
Well, they're looking for standing. I mean, we talked about this with the BYU last week.
Right.
That that's exactly what they're trying to find. They're trying to find, basically, until you can prove that someone has been harmed directly, you really don't have a strong case. And so that's what they're looking for. And they're asking this, kind of self-incrimination. It's plead the fifth on that one, for goodness sake.
That's a wonderful segue into the Florida case.
It
don't
is
you think?
perfect.
That was
Exactly.
really well done.
Well,
Robert.
I was working that way.
Florida.
I actually went backwards to go forwards.
Okay, there you go.
We went back to the future.
A Florida appeals court rejected a bid to end the state's largest private school voucher program on Tuesday, but it's unclear if the ruling will end the 2-year-old legal battle. The First District Court of Appeals sided with the lower court's decision to throw out the lawsuit filed by Florida Education Association and others, who argued that its method of funding private school education for more than 90,000 school children this year is unconstitutional. The 3-judge panel said the plaintiffs haven't been harmed by the program and denied that it violates state law. The vouchers are funded by corporations, which in turn receive tax credits on money they owe to the state. So this,
I love it.
Yeah. So, but as I said, though, this may not end.
No.
As you said, they're going to keep coming back.
Oh, well, they've got all the money in the world. I mean, who's the litigant in this? I mean, who's going after this? I mean, this
The
is
union.
Yeah, this is the teachers' union
Well, they
down.
don't have any money.
No, they're poor.
They give all the money to the teachers.
That's right, they do. Well, this is classic, zero sum worldview. Mm-hmm. There's only so much stuff, and if somebody else is getting some of it, then you're taking it away from us. And with the strategy that they have down there, using corporations giving donations for these what do you call it, vouchers?
Yeah, which once again go to low income families. That
Correct.
Again, was part of it.
Exactly. And
wait. They go to low-income families whose children are going to fill-in-the-blank schools. Robert? Catholic schools.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't want
Parochial.
our early rising Sunday morning Christians out there to not understand this has to do with our religious schools too.
Well, I mean, it is Catholic schools, but
Yes.
it's not just Catholic schools.
No, it's not just, but a
private,
large percentage of them
faith-based
are.
schools. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And so you're seeing the Baptist Association, the Catholic, everybody coming up and defending this, and it's a brilliant strategy. It's not a spending. The state isn't spending any money on this. What they're giving is tax credits to the corporations that fund the vouchers. It is brilliant.
Which is it's how you get around the not real argument, but it's how you get around the often proposed argument that it's government
Taking money
and
out
church.
of taking money out of one pocket.
It's not tax money.
That's right.
It's how they collect the money, not how they spend the money.
Well, that's it. And the argument is they have no standing because nobody's reducing any.
Nobody's harmed.
Nobody's harmed in this thing. It's a win-win for everybody.
And again, these are issues that are the battle is not over. Obviously.
Oh, no.
So as soon as we probably conclude this program, we'll find about another court case that is going to overturn some of these various things. And we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. And as we get started on our next article today, we're talking about one that comes in the Washington Post, an opinion piece. And it's written by Ryan McAnally and McAnally Lenz and Miroslav Volf. And I don't know either of these writers, but it's interesting. The headline is to Clinton and Trump, it's all about the middle class. To Jesus, it's all about the poor. The opening paragraph, finding things that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump agree on is no easy task. ISIS is bad, New York is great, and a bit more surprisingly, the next president ought to focus on supporting America's middle class. And he says how this has been a typical campaign swing for presidential candidates for some time, and many American politicians. But he says, indeed, the Bible has basically nothing to say about the middle class. The idea of the middle class didn't even exist in the social world of the ancient Near East and Roman Empire. But more profoundly, the Bible is relatively silent about the middle class because it's concerned with the interests of someone else, the poor. And it goes on to take various psalms and also beatitudes and substitute middle class for the word poor in there. So let's get started on this, guys. What do you think about the basic foundation of this argument, Doc? What do you think?
Well, of course, I take issue with the idea that there was no middle class at that time. I would say the middle class was so broad you could hardly see to the ends of it. But at the ends, you would find the poor, and you'd find the
yes,
the extreme housewives in New Jersey on the other end. I mean, there were definitely ends of it that were rich and poor, and I think that the idea of the middle class was that's just who it was. The middle class looks different now because the number of poor have increased so dramatically. The number of affluent persons have increased so dramatically that the middle class has actually been squeezed into a smaller, concentrated group than it was at the time.
So you come up with operational definitions there of what is poor. You come up with, depending on the society and the class, and you come up with, but in those ancient times, I mean, the disparity, income disparity gets talked a lot about these days, but the inequality was huge.
But again, now see, to us, poor is below a poverty limit.
Right.
A poverty limit where many people live and drive cars and have a roof over their head and eat at McDonald's. I mean, it may not be the best life, but it's not the poverty that we think of when we think of biblical times when Jesus was roaming around,
And
which is
certainly-
what this article's about.
And certainly a different standard than many other countries. In fact, most other countries.
Right.
About leveling what is poverty. I mean, Robert, you worked in a number of other countries where this would be a kind of a ridiculous argument.
Yeah, no, that's right. This is clickbait, basically. I mean, this is what they've done. To click on the article, the headline is what sucks you into it, and then you start reading it. And these guys are so off the wall on so much of this. But Jesus spoke to every human being, and he talked to the poor of spirit. Is really more talking about than the poor of economic deprivation. And so the approach Jesus takes on this is not to look for the Roman. Jesus didn't say, look, pay your taxes to the Romans so they'll take care of the poor. That was not what Jesus. That's what this article is basically saying, that the government is supposed to do this, not the church. And it's wrong. It's a fallacy. They've missed the point on the whole Christian. What is our motivation for helping the poor? How do we do that? And who is the one? When you look at the statistics on the giving in America, guess who gives the most? The middle class, and in fact those that are kind of on the lower end of that cycle proportionally.
Right.
They give a higher percentage of their income to help the poor than do the rich or anyone else at the higher end of the
We
middle
brought
class.
this.
So yeah, it's a false argument.
I brought this study up this article up in our class last night, actually, and a couple of interesting things that came from it. One guy went to the Psalms and quoted where it says, I think it's in Psalms, said, I'd rather be neither poor nor rich.
Right.
That sounds like the middle class.
Middle class. That's
So
right.
the
Working class basically is what it is.
But also the idea about what does that mean to care for the poor? Is it to bring them out of poverty or to care for them spiritually? And is that different? So, Doc, what do you think on that argument?
Well, Ben, I'm always glad you turned to me on the heavy questions of theology and biblical interpretation.
Well, that's why you're bishop.
I think Jesus always understood there would be poor. In fact, I think he actually said,
says that,
poor
yes.
you will be with you always. But what I think Jesus understood was that the way that we care for those who are unable to care for themselves says a lot about the way that God cares for us. That our biblical, that our Christian fruit is seen most clearly when we are generous to those who have no means to repay it. And so when Jesus talks about religion, he actually says true religion is this, that we care for the widows and the orphans. That's another way of saying those who are on the outside, those who are poor, those who are unable to care for themselves. Because in this, if that's true religion, then it's in that manner that the love of God becomes clear. It says if don't have your friend over for dinner, because if you have a friend over for dinner, he'll just invite you right back and what's been gained. But that God may have glory and that Jesus may be known to people, we care for those who have no ability to pay us back. So I think Jesus always understood when he spoke to everybody, that's true. But when he spoke to the everybody, which was that large middle class, he also had very specific rules about how we were to treat those in authority over us. At that end of the spectrum, we were to be obedient to them because God had placed them there. And he also had very specific rules for how we were to treat the poor. Yes, we recognize that we'll never abolish poverty, but in poverty, that's where the light of Christ shines. And that's no different today. So in answer to the question, should we be helping people who are poor come up out of their poverty? Well, absolutely. Why wouldn't we?
Yeah, it's fascinating. There is and I use the term prison purposefully. You can be taken captive by riches, and you can be taken captive by poverty. Yeah. And really as far as I'm, the way I kind of tease this out is that really that's what he's talking about. Don't be taken captive by money or mammon or
treasures of the earth.
Exactly. And that's what happens when you focus on the physical side of it. The poor are just as imprisoned in poverty as the rich are by their wealth. They're imprisoned by their lack of wealth. And so what he's talking about is true, that the truth sets you free. So that helping people get free from that. And of course, that two hands of the gospel, demonstrating gospel, the love of God, doing that is essential for being able to speak the peace of God. The two go together. You can't separate them. And in this, trying to impose this biblical worldview, if you will, onto a political system.
Landscape, yes.
Yeah, we as Christians, that is the filter through which we look at the world. But we know that there are others that don't have that filter.
Yeah. And poverty is used today the way slavery was before. You brought up the idea of being a slave.
Right.
The simple reality, the way I see it anyway, I don't know if it's a reality, the way I see it is that poverty is a horrible thing for the people who are poor, but it's a wonderful tool for the people who are in charge. And increasingly, our government is using poverty as a tool. And when you use something as a tool to get the things you want, the last thing in the world you want to do is cure it. Yeah. You don't want to lay that tool down. You want it to be a bigger tool, a stronger tool, more tool. So let's create as much dependency and as much poverty as we can, because it's working really well for us in governing.
Well, let's look at this argument about the politicians are using the middle class. I mean, they want to. Everybody brings up the middle class one way or another, and in fact, they have different ideas about what that means. And one might say it's opportunity, and other might say it's just simply where you ought to be, and we ought to bring everybody into the middle class, which kind of ruins the math. But the point here is interesting to me is that as you stated, the middle class do offer so much more of themselves in giving, and isn't that kind of a trickle down, to use a phrase that's not in favor
with certain folks?
Yes.
Well, that was,
right.
The Wesleys. I mean, they were huge on this. That Protestant work ethic.
Well, acts of piety and acts of mercy. As you said, the two hands of the gospel.
Right, exactly. And that the whole purpose of that, what we would, deem the middle class, basically are the working class. They're the ones that are going out doing the work, earning the income. They're working as hard as they can. They're saving as much as they can, and they're giving as much as they can. There's this pass-through that's taking place, so that your life is larger than just the material riches that you accumulate. You accumulate those things for a purpose, and it's to help those that are indeed in need. And see,
that's the argument for capitalism. It's the argument. Right?
Exactly.
The rising tide lifts all boats.
It helps everybody, and so what they're playing this game, in articles like this where they're trying to pit the two against the other, and there really is two different worldviews on this. And you said it well several weeks ago, where you talked about do you want the nanny state where the government is so huge that it takes care of all your needs? You look for government to do that, or do you? The other view is you work with this God who is your provider. It's not the government that's your provider, and you become a part of what He's doing on earth. You've got a reason for life.
And in that we discover what it really means to care.
Correct.
And whether it's for the poor or for the poor in spirit.
Poor in spirit, absolutely. There's some people that are very rich that are very poor.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Glad that you could join us here on this morning as we bring you some stories from around the country and around the world and how it intersects with our faith. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis, and we're going to look at an article from the Daily Caller, an opinion piece by Matt Lewis called "Jesus, Take the Lever." Do you and I have a moral obligation to vote this November, he asks. Is it unpatriotic or wrong to decline to choose the lesser of two evils? In times like these, we seek wisdom from the works of great men. Sometimes maxims are contradictory. The widely popular Hamilton musical, for example, suggests we are compelled to choose. But he adds parenthetically, facing a difficult choice in 1800, in the musical, Hamilton concludes, when all is said and done, Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none. On the other hand, a popular meme quoting C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity suggests in the exact opposite. I'm not the only person struggling to answer this question and confront the conundrum, arguing that this election is a train wreck. The Washington Post, Mark Thiessen, equates the choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump to the trolley problem. The trolley problem, just in summary, is you have a runaway train coming. You have 5 people on one track, and you have one person on another track, and you can throw the lever that takes it from the 5 to the 1. Is that the morally correct thing to do? So you go through that, and maybe that would be clear to you, but some other people that would not be so clear. Let's just start with the basic premise here. Is there a moral issue with not voting?
Moral issue. Well, there's a civic issue. All right, so we can go there. We know that this is to be able to vote on the government that of your country or society or whatever is a rare privilege in this world. Now, we'd sort of assume everybody, but for it to actually have effect is something that people all over the world, many of whom try to get here so that they can have a voice in what goes on in their government. So there is definitely a civic responsibility to be a participant in the formation of your government. I'm just going to lay that out as a sort of what it means to be a citizen. Now, is there a moral duty? I would say the moral duty is to obey the law. I think we have a responsibility as believers to obey just laws and laws that God has that come down that aren't immoral laws. We're not to obey immoral laws, we're to obey moral laws. So you can argue from that position that it's morally right to participate in the process.
In this article, the writer here also pulls out another biblical reference here. He says, "This is how I feel about the election. Some have suggested that not voting for Trump is tantamount to voting for Clinton. This strikes me as a bogus argument. By passively not voting, you simply wash your hands of it." To pull out the reference here, for good or bad, it turns out the way it would have turned out had you not intervened. It is by taking action, grabbing the ballot or wrestling it to the railing, that we become truly complicit. Is this troubling to you at all, Doc? Someone who's maybe considering not voting?
Well, God was so clever. He sent his son into a culture where there was no voting, so we have no idea what Jesus would do. As he snaps his bracelet on his wrist. I don't. No, I actually don't think it is an issue. I think voting has, Robert's talking about civic responsibility. I would say it has a lot to do with what we talk about in some of these other articles. It has a lot to do with standing. If I want to have standing to have a voice in what my government does, if I want to have standing, if I want to get mad when the government does something, I should have at least exercised my privilege to vote so that I then have standing. That's one of those things I think, everybody who gets out and protests about something, that should be the first question we ask. Did you vote in the last election? I don't care who you vote. Did you vote? Do you have standing?
But that's not a limitation on our freedom of speech, though.
It's what?
It's not a limitation on our freedom of speech whether or not we vote. I mean, there's no connection between freedom of speech.
Oh no, there's no connection. I just want to know. I'm just curious. I mean, I want to know.
You don't
I want to know
who they voted for, but if they voted.
I want to know if somebody has standing.
Right.
Have you taken an active role in putting the people there that you're now saying are crooks and evil and horrible? And if not, then it's hard for me to assume you have any real standing. Yeah, you can have a voice if you want to, but I'm not going to listen to you.
We can. I think we can logically extend that argument. I'll tell you. I'll confess. There's one presidential election I did not vote for the top of the ticket. And that was between Carter and Ford.
1800, right?
Thank you so much. No, Buchanan. I couldn't decide between them. I thought they were equally inept, and so I think a lot of people are facing that conundrum here today and don't want the third party, either the third or fourth party candidates either, or the so-called independent guy that has no chance of even getting on the ballot. But this is a tough election for a lot of people to make a decision on. And I think it comes down to who they're not going to vote for. It's maybe the primary.
In this election, I think most people are although there are lots of people that are very much in favor of one or the other.
But I think
I'm talking to a lot of people that are not voting. A lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, people I would never have guessed would say, I'm just taking the year off.
Now, are they just going to not vote at the top? They're not going to vote in the presidential? Are they going to vote in the others?
Problem.
See, that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, if they don't vote in the presidential, a lot of them won't vote in any.
They just won't go in the.
No, they just won't go. They won't wake up that day.
They won't go to the poll.
Do whatever they do.
Right.
Now,
I'm shocked by that. I really am.
Yeah, I just find that hard to.
Now, I think your argument about standing, though, is significant in lots of different areas as well.
Well, that's good because you were arguing with me a minute ago. So I'm glad
that's
I convinced
position.
you.
That's my position. But I'll give you an example. Now, when I was a young reporter in college, I was just out of college. In fact, I was doing work for a local radio station. I was their news guy. And there was a group of professors and other concerned citizens who were talking about poverty, our subject for the last segment, talking about poverty and all the things that we ought to be doing to help alleviate poverty. So I asked, well, what personal commitment have you made to that? And they were silent.
Crickets.
And they were crickets. And so that, you do have an argument there to say that if you're going to espouse a position, you ought to be taking part in the process. So that may drive me to make a decision here.
Yeah, but you don't. I mean, we don't. The argument that's in the article here is, can we pick between the lesser of two evils? And I really never vote that way. I vote for the person or party which most closely identifies with the things that I think matter. So if I don't think that babies should be killed in the womb, then I'm probably going to go with the guy who doesn't think babies should be killed in the womb. The difficulty with this election, and the reason so many people aren't going to vote, is it's just confusing.
Right.
I mean, is he a Christian? Isn't he a Christian? Does she agree with abortion? Doesn't she agree with abortion? I mean, everything changes and flip-flops back and forth, and so you really hardly know what anybody truly stands for.
So it's hard to penetrate.
And neither one of them have a voting record anywhere, really, that gives us any indication. Clinton's got a little bit of one, but
well,
and then it comes down to a matter of who do you trust?
Right. Well, see, that's the big problem,
and that to me is where the moral consequence comes.
And that's why I brought up that thing about the ticket. Do you vote? You asked, do you vote straight? Ticket party line or not? And when people ask me, I recommend that they go to the websites. It's amazing how many people have not done any due diligence. Right. They're getting all of their information from the mainstream media. The majority of them are Fox News, which I believe is part of the mainstream media.
Sound bites.
Or some comic. Who's
right. Late night comic,
some cynic, and so nobody has really, a lot. I can't say nobody, but many people have not really done their homework. They haven't been paying attention. I mean, we're kind of political people, and so we like this stuff. We follow this stuff, but it's remarkable how many people don't have a clue about any of this stuff, or if they do, it's from the Entertainment Today or one of those programs. So getting people to go to the websites, the Republican and the Democrat websites, and look at their platforms and actually see what they're saying. And you may agree. I think you said, there are people that absolutely agree with where the Democrats want to take this country, and some that are in concord with where the Republican position is, and so that's where you make the decision. Now, the problem is that the two headliners, we're not sure if they're tied to those platforms.
Well, especially because I'm not even sure they're tied to what they've said before.
Yes,
because you see Donald Trump's support is waning some because he's watering down those kind of cast iron things that he'd put up, cast iron platforms that he'd put up before.
Well,
And
here's the other one too. Is I know some people that are more ideologically aligned with the both the Green Party and what's the other one, the Libertarian Party.
Libertarian Party, right.
But they're not going to vote for them because they know they can't win. So
Correct.
that to me is you have more of a moral discussion there
Yeah.
about not following what they believe is more ideologically correct for them.
Yeah.
well, this is, of course, what happened in Rome with the Toga Party. You remember the
Yeah,
rise of the
Toga,
Toga
yeah.
Party, yes.
Yeah, Caesar
which
thing.
is the party I'm preparing to align with. This C.S. Lewis piece I thought was very interesting.
You were
because
opposing hymns.
C.S. Lewis had a very different look at this, and in summary, his thought in Mere Christianity, this is your morning devotion, everybody, was that the devil always sends evil into the world in pairs. Isn't that a wonderful thought?
Yeah, that is.
That he sends it into the world in pairs and often opposites. And the idea is that we look at one and then we look at the other, and we're forced to pick one, the lesser of the two evils, and we should keep our eyes centered on Christ and continue to pursue that goal.
And we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. Good to have you with us on Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. I'm Ben Ball, and let's take a look at one more article. This is from Breitbart, and it's about the Islamic State magazine. Break the Cross. Islamic State magazine mocks Christianity, claims Jesus is a slave of Allah. And it's from the magazine Dabiq. In the latest issue of the English-language magazine Dabiq, the Islamic State calls on Christians to abandon Christianity, arguing that Jesus himself was a slave of Allah who will wage jihad upon returning to earth. The 50th issue of the magazine, titled Break the Cross, is dedicated to convincing Christians that Jesus was a prophet of Allah and was never crucified, that most of the New Testament is a perversion of Jesus' story orchestrated by St. Paul, a criminal, treacherous Jew who gave up massacring Christians in order to subvert the religion from the inside. All right, let's start anywhere. Start anywhere on this. But Doc, you say you read Dabiq. I mean, you have kept up with this. So,
as long as nobody from the NSA is listening, I will confirm now. Hey, it is incredible. It comes out 3 or 4 times a year. It kind of depends on their schedules and holy days. But the way it is put together as a glossy 6-color magazine, it's nicer than anything you'd find published in the United States. It's beautiful. It's written by top scholars, top warriors. It is, and it really. We were talking during the break. I said it really. Pravda's got nothing on these people. This is spinning things at a speed that is just, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's remarkable what they do. And it is online, and there are a couple of places. The Clarion Project, as you mentioned earlier, Ben, has got it online. And it's actually worth every Christian's taking a little time to read. This article from Breitbart says it's really the first time that they've attacked Christianity, and maybe in this way, but they've always called the Christians the Crusaders, always remembering the Crusades back 10,000 years ago. I mean, this is so that's the language they use to describe us as Christians generally. And this particular article is fascinating in that it lays out the Islamic position that Jesus, who is featured in the Quran, is actually on their side, and on his return will look at Christianity and say, you guys got it all wrong. From the time I left, you took this religion, you turned it into a Trinitarian religion, you started saying all sorts of bad things, you began enslaving people, and now I'm here to set it right. And by the way, these Muslims over here are right, and I'm on their side, so I'm going to wage holy jihad on you.
Mm-hmm. I know someone who is an agnostic who long before ever heard of ISIS, and even before we had 9/11 or terrorist attacks, said the same thing about Paul. Said the same thing, that Paul made it up, that Paul created a lot of the of this, and that he has perverted the religion.
That's unfortunately in the liberal seminaries. That's a pretty popular position to take. That Paul is the one that distorted Christianity, and rather than and we have a version here that's different. They're also the ones that say that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and that it was Ezra and all that other stuff. So they have the revisionists have come in, and of course this magazine, like you said, is a really slick apologetic for Islam. And they are, it's fascinating because there is this article in this magazine. That the purpose of the magazine has always been to give legitimacy, intellectual legitimacy to their worldview, their Islamic worldview.
Well, it's their major recruiting tool, too.
Exactly, right. And so they're trying to approach others and say, no, we're legitimate. We have intellectuals. We can argue our points. Yeah. This isn't just go out and murder and mayhem. We're actually following a direction here in our thinking. And so, in essence, they have attacked, which is really unusual. Because what they've been doing probably for the last 10 years, they've been saying, no, there's not that much difference between Islam and Judaism. We all worship the same God, Christianity. We all, and Allah and Jehovah are really kind of the same God. And we have this there's a lot of commonality that we can come together on, and we can work together on this. We're all monotheistic. And then something like this comes out.
Right.
Which is really what Muhammad was saying all along in his surahs in the Quran. So you're just, it's wonderful. I think it's great. If you really want to know their position on Christianity, well, this is pretty much it. This is not distorting.
Well, what I want to hear
the teaching.
I hear from you guys actually is your feeling about reading things that with in mind, to bring up Paul again, Paul talked about avoiding stumbling blocks, about trying not to make sure that people aren't stumbling in their faith because of some other practice. At that time, he was talking about sacrificing or eating the meat that's sacrificed to idols. So,
right.
But here we have something that is making an argument that even some Christians may look at and say, maybe. That aren't very deep in their faith and understand this and say, well, I can see their point. Isn't that what they hope will happen?
Of course they do. Well, look, no, they've kind of put the cards on the table with this article. They've kind of played their hand here. And so what they're saying, when you say Jesus is a slave of Allah, I mean, I mean, come on. Even the liberals are going to push back on that one a little bit. So, and the cover story, breaking the cross. Yeah. That Jesus is going to get in cahoots with the Mahdi when he returns. That's their savior, their Messiah. They have their own little Messiah thing, and Jesus is a part of that process. No, this is.
But when someone says he has problems with people who cling to their Bibles and their guns, then isn't that sympathetic?
Well. Some would say that it is.
Careful.
Me included in that.
And then I think Doc over here is thinking that is the NSA really listening here before I comment any further.
Right. When was the last time you had a fatwa issued on you? Is all I want to know, Doc. I mean, we've all done it.
Not recently. No. I have, this is, you have to hand it to the authors and editors here, and the grand muftis behind all this stuff, because this is a magazine digging up a 4th century controversy in the church.
Yeah,
they're not digging it up; they're maintaining it. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. But I mean, they're presenting it.
Right.
The average Muslim walking around on the earth today is not aware that Christianity fought this very issue within its own borders.
Correct.
Back, 16th, 17th centuries ago, and kind of came out with the fact that there actually was a God in 3 persons. And so all they're doing is this is really typical of the way this apologetic for them works. Pull up an old controversy and represent it anew.
Right.
We see that in the church all the time, right? Almost every heresy that demanded a council to be set aside has resurfaced under a different name at some point in history. And I think this is... Why am I moving my hands this much? I'm sorry.
Well, Italian.
It's radio. I know no one could see, but I'm sitting here like a frenetic
It's
nut.
mesmerizing.
It is
actually.
mesmerizing. But this is here are some people that have decided to dig up the heresies that came up in the church before and lay them out as if they've just realized them. This is the way it's always been. You guys just don't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they're arguing these old points, that Jesus really didn't die on the cross. I mean, if you really want to know their position on Jesus, I mean, the Quran talks about Isa, who is their Jesus. That's the name that they use for Jesus, and that he was a prophet, but he was not. I mean, they just can't wrap their brains around that he was the Son of God. I mean, that just drives them.
And not divine.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So God is one. So we've got some major issues between the two. And they've just spelled it out. They're not hiding it. We have a friend coming in from Pakistan that's going to be speaking about this stuff, and the name of his book is called The Mirage, and that really that's the tactic they've historically used, but all of a sudden, man, they've come out with this thing and exposed their hand. So we'll see how that, to the sympathetic, this will be,
Well, it also is it's a very strong argument. It's a very pro-Muslim or pro-Islamic argument, rather, in that, when Muhammad is cobbling together all of the kingdoms he's conquered and all the people he's conquered, he's looking at multiple gods. Mm-hmm. There is multiple god worship happening out there. And as a way of congealing and getting everybody into one glump, he says, no, there's one God. So this has been their whole history is reductionist. We're going to take a bunch of gods and create one. So when Christianity took one God and made him three, in their opinion, that was seen as a violation of everything they've been taught.
Polytheistic.
That's just a little historical background.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, this is a big debate. This is when you get around apologetic circles, Christian apologetic circles,
run.
This is one of the issues that we go through
right.
and try to draw out the distinctions to show that the evidence really does not support these positions. And like you said, this was dealt with, centuries ago by the church.
We thank you for joining us on Faith Matters. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.